Welcome. The group Le Vie del Commercio, the popular bank of Lanciano and Sulmona, and the local administration of Lanciano welcomes you to our town. Whoever comes to Lanciano hardly ever imagines being in a town rich in historical monuments of exceptional beauty. Lanciano maintains its historical importance over the centuries with its local fairs. Since ancient times, Abruzzo has been characterized by sheep farming due to scarcity of arable land. Lanciano is at the crossroads of two major paths of the Tratturo, the great grassy paths on which flocks of sheep seasonally migrate from the highlands to the sea and from the sea to the mountains. Already in Roman times, when its name was Anaxanum, the town experienced a new development during the Middle Ages, thanks to the port of Ortona, an important commercial basis used by the Venetians in the Adriatic. Its fairs became a privileged place of encounter and exchange. The town's wealth grew until it became the first town in Abruzzo for population, with its quarters of Lancianovecchia, CIVITANOVA, SACCA and BORGO, which extend in a fan around the square. These are enriched by monuments, magnificent mansions of the great merchant families and feudal nobility of neighbouring towns and religious building, real treasures of art. We advise you to take a guided tour of the town divided into 3 itineraries, each one lasting 1 hour, all starting from Piazza Plebiscito, situated at the end of Corso, Trente e Trieste. Place yourself at the centre of the square with your back to the basilica and observe. On your left there is the Pietrosa hill, where our first itinerary takes place, with the Church of St. Francis, the home of the Eucharistic miracle. On your right there is Erminio Hill, the second itinerary, where there is the district of Lancianovecchia, and opposite the Selva Hill with the districts of Civitanova and Sacca, third itinerary. In the sections you can find information on the history and traditions of Lanciano. We wish you a good stay in our town. Lanciano's history. Human presence on the Lancianese territory goes back to the Paleolithic age 30,000 years ago, since splinter flints and stone tools from that period have been found in the area. In 1969, Professor Alfredo Geniolo from the University of Bari brought to light a hut settlement called Rossi Village in a digging site in Marcianese and dated it to the 4th-5th millennium BC. Recent excavations into the historical centre have instead allowed to date the first settlements into the today urban area between the 12th and the 7th centuries BC, between the Bronze and the Iron Ages. Today is the period the oldest historians Giacomo Fella and Pietro Polidori dated the mythological foundation of the city due to Solima, one of Enna's friends, who escaped from Troy's destruction. In pre-Roman times, between the 6th and the 5th century BC, the Abruzzo-Molesian coast was inhabited by Frentans, an Oscan language people probably originated by Saniti, whose many archaeological testimonies, especially feminine and masculine grave goods, are kept into the Archaeological Civic Museum. In the Roman period, from the 4th century BC, Anaxanum enjoyed a great development and prosperity, thanks to its geographical position in the middle of many important streets, and in the 1st century, Anaxanum became Municipium Romano, as demonstrated by the Roman gravestones found in the 16th century and inserted at the basis of the cathedral bell tower, where it remained till the Second World War, when it was discovered into the town hall after being damaged during the bombings on the 4th of April, 1944. Notwithstanding its difficult reading, it's considered original and demonstrates that Anaxanum had magistrates who were owned by town halls. Anaxanum kept and increased its importance during the Imperial Age, which has left many archaeological traces traditionally, including also the bridge entitled to Diocletian, but we have news about this only through a memorial tablet found in the 18th century, even if the archaeological investigation has brought to light structures dated late Roman period, 284-305. Under the Byzantine rule from 1538 after the Goths in 1493 AD, it became part of the Lombard dukedom in Benevento in the second half of the 7th century. If the Byzantine settlement is connected to the presence of the Basilian monks' monastery, where the Eucharistical miracle took place, the construction of a no more existing fortified structure in the middle of Lancianovecchia is to be connected to the Longobardo domination. After the year 1000, Lanciano entered a new prosperous period with the Normans. The Emperor Federico II declared free from taxes all the goods intended to his fairs. They were kept twice a year in occasion of the Transhumance, a so important activity for the Abruzzese economy that in 1447 King Alfonso V from Aragona decided to rule it with the institution of the Regge Dogana, royal customs, of sheep passages, and the granting of a mint, since it was the most populous city in the region. In 1515, Lanciano was declared diocese, and in 1545 it became an archdiocese, independent from Chieti. But the same period also witnessed a decay in its economic activities because of the new political assets, of the discovery of America and its effects, and because of the many plague epidemics. In the 1640s, its state ownership, the direct belonging to the Neapolitan crown, was brought into question. Lanciano passed to the Diavolos family, but the city appealed, and a long case started and lasted almost until the last part of the following century. The recovery in politics started by Carlo III from Borbone had great positive effects on Lanciano too. The 18th century constituted an actual renaissance period for the city, culturally, artistically, and economically speaking. It's the century of the great artistic site of the Madonna del Ponte Cathedral, but also of the gradual agrarian reorganization of the big cultural personalities as the musician Fedele Fenaroli, born in 1730, the jurist and intellectual Pasquale Maria Liberatore, born in 1763, the historian Gennaro Ravizza, born in 1766, and many others. In the French decade, Lanciano became Sangro department capital, including the area of the region below Pescara River, and since 1808 it has been hosting the Abruzzese Appeal Court. During the Restoration, Lanciano was well known for its turbulence and not well considered by Neapolitan kings, and only the Italian unity gave back to the city its importance, especially in economy. With the progressive urban enlargement in 1879 and the construction of important infrastructures as Verdi's waterworks, the Sanguitano-Adriatic Railway, a lot of commercial and proto-industrial activities developed, from the hemp working to the production of earthenwares and to the actual factories as Torrieri Brothers stocking factory, the Rocco Carabas printery and publishing house, until the opening of the big tobacco factory. It's an industrial and modern city that on the 6th of October in 1943 made some of its youngest inhabitants protagonists of one of the most famous events of the resistance in Abruzzo. That day, in an instinctive way, the whole population rebelled against the Germans, helping a group of partisans who were fighting against the enemy. The sacrifice of the 11 October martyrs has granted a golden campaign medal to the city. First itinerary, the district of Borgo and the town centre. Starting from Piazza Plebiscito, with your back to the Basilica, on your left walk along Via dei Tribunali, called like this because once there was the courthouse. Cross the parking of the Pietrosa and reach the first stop of our itinerary. Fonte del Borgo and the Candle Factory. La Fonte Borgo, called like this because one could enter through the destroyed door of St. Angelo. is one of the first monuments that attracts tourists' attention when they come to Lanciano. It was built on the Fosso Pietrosa near the Aragon walls, still visible today, together with the torrione that marked the corners of the city's walls. Its construction goes back to Roman times, documented in the 16th century, but it is very unlikely that it presents appearance with stone masks, where water flew underground, and 9 series of arches, once used as washhouse, is the result of 19th century maintenance work. Together with Fontana di Civitanova, it is the only one left of the 9 fountains, with 200 wells within the walls, which assured plenty of water to the town. In 1904, the aqueduct del Verde was built and running water arrived from Faro San Martino to Lanciano. In the Middle Ages, the vast and ancient building near the fountain housed the Hospitum of St. Angelo. It has been expanded and modified over the centuries. Today, it is used as a residence and as a venue for craft activities. Go back until Piazza Plebiscito and, staying on your left, go up Corso Roma, where after a few meters you will find the Church of St. Francis. St. Francis's Church, which holds the Eucharistic miracle, was built on a pre-existent Benedictine monastery given to a community of monks around 750 BC. They were Catholic priests, and they confirm the antiquity. Today we can see a bare stone frontage crowned with elements of plunder from St. Angelo Chapel of Lombards, demolished at the beginning of the 19th century. For about 10 years, the inside has been renovated, similar to other churches. It was decorated at the beginning of the 18th century. Recent renovations have recovered a room in which a monumental organ was found, a gift from Pope Clemente XVI, and a pulpit built by Modesto Salvini from Osogna. The paintings of time dedicated to 3 biblical heroines, Judith, Rachel, and Esther, were created by Teodoro Donato from Chieti. The monumental complex is part of the cloister and the former courthouse building, which dates back from 1808 onwards. The Eucharistic Miracle. The relics of the Eucharistic miracle were once kept in the dark chapel inside the tower. Then they were transferred to the altar on the right-hand side by the Vallasecca family. From 1902, they have been kept in a box on the altar designed by Filippo Sargiacomo, where one can contemplate the precious gift of a silver ostensory made by a Neapolitan silversmith in the 18th century. The Lancianese Eucharistic miracle is the oldest Eucharistic miracle recognized by the Catholic Church, according to tradition, handed down by about 700 years. During Mass, a Basilian monk, doubting the presence of Jesus, saw the Eucharistic species turn into flesh and blood. Since the 8th century, the relics have been preserved in form and were first kept by the Basilian monks from 1258 to 1809, when they were forced to leave the monastery due to Neapolitan suppression. From 1809, the miracle has been held by the Holy Rosary Confraternity in the side chapel of St. Francis's Church. The Franciscans finally returned to permanently reside in the old church from 1952, and they have preserved it ever since to this day. In 1970, 1971, and 1980, the relics were submitted to medical and scientific investigations, giving amazing results. Tests have established that the host is made of myocardial tissue from human flesh, and the blood is real blood of group AB. The results are as follows. The host is of a mesodermal origin, recognized as myocardium and endocardium. The blood is real blood. The flesh and blood are of human species. The blood group AB is the same as the flesh and blood. Normal proteins found have the same as in normal fresh blood. In the blood, the results showed low levels of sodium, potassium, chlorides, phosphorus, and magnesium, while there were high levels of calcium. The visit continues in the Museum of the Miracle, where it is possible to reach the Church of Saint Longino and the Archaeological Walk. Near the Eucharistic Miracle Sanctuary in Plebiscito Square, recent work has revealed a huge barrel vaulted room dating back to the 11th and 12th centuries, from the Benedictines to the present day Franciscans, dedicated to Saint Longino. There are also some paintings of Saint Anthony and Saint John the Baptist and the head of the Virgin Mary. On one wall to your right, in this 18th century church, there is a 14th century affresco depicting the crucifixion, which from here it is possible to reach a place that concerns archaeological traces of a Roman stone tank. To your left there is a large square hall, once the seat of the Brotherhood of the Raccomandati, below the sacristy of St. Francis, with paintings about the end of the 15th century with scenes of the Apocalypse. The archaeological route. From the Church of St. Francis, it's possible to reach Plebiscito Square, where archaeological digs have brought to light connecting corridors, passageways and rooms under the existing Old Town Square. Going down some steps, one can reach the area of the evacuations conducted in the 20th century. On the left, one can see underground stone structures which held wheat. On the right, there are blocks of stone with signs from the violent earthquakes that hit the town in 1456. Going back to the piazza, you can see the basilica that apparently is built on the ground, but actually it is entirely built on a bridge, the Diocletian Bridge. The Diocletian Bridge. The first bridge was built and intended to go beyond the Pietrosa Valley, which has been found in archaeological excavation digs in the cathedral in 1785 and handed down to us by the historian Omobono Bokake, who tells us of a Roman bridge built by the Senate and the people of Anaxanum, which they dedicated to Diocletiano. The majestic structure that today we can admire is a complex of series of work carried out between the 13th and 14th centuries. The primitive chapel is dedicated to the Virgin Mary. In 1513, the second bridge was built next to the other one. In 1520, it was covered by vaults, so the upper level was expanded to the church of the Madonna del Ponte. In 1583, the third passageway, called the corridor, was opened. It was a pedestrian walkway that connected the square to Corso Bandiera. The bridge for many centuries was the only link between the town and the fair. In 1905, Trento and Trieste Street was built. From 1973, the Century Bridge was restored to be used as an auditorium for summer music courses. As a result of this architectural evolution, the Italian Post dedicated a stamp. Our visits continues on Piazza Plebiscito, where we find the town hall and the basilica. Piazza del Plebiscito and the town hall. It existed between the cathedral and St. Francis's Church. This gave way to a new starting point for Lanciano in the 20th century. Overlooking the Unità d'Italia Square is the town hall. The frontage of the square was renovated between 1868 and 1869. Next to this, there is the Casa di Conversazione, an institution dating back to the 18th century. The private rooms at the club were enlarged between 1900 and 1901, and a ballroom was made. Below this, there were the town's first cinema, now called the Mazzini Hall. After the war, the town hall was extended and raised. The Basilica of the Madonna del Ponte. Plebiscito Square's religious centre is focused on the Cathedral of the Madonna del Ponte, taking its title from being built on the Diocletian Bridge. Here there is a bell tower dating back between 1610 to 1621, built by the Milanese Tommaso Gottardo, called Civic Tower. The above floors were used as a prison in secular purposes in 1819. Eugenio Miccitelli from Teramo had the adjacent church demolished to make way for the cathedral basilica. There is to this day a plaque in the square where it once was. After the Second World War, Donato Villante drew the drawings for the dome. Thanks to his invention, the oldest arcade that was attached from the church to the bell tower disappeared. Today we can see the inside of the church, thanks to its many inventions, from 1785 to 1794. In those years, the high altar of the church, piece of work of the Neapolitan Crescenzo Trincese in 1758, that was on the long side of the building in correspondence to the primitive adjacents, where today there's the chapel of the Sacrament Santissima with the painting of the Last Supper, painted by Tommaso Alessandrino in 1601. The Neapolitan Giacinto Diana, a professor at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Naples, painted the vaults, the dome, the lunettes, and the two altarpieces between 1787 and 1793. In 1806, the artist Giuseppe Angelo Ronzi from Penne painted the Queen of Saba and King Solomon, while on the left-hand side of the presbytery, destroyed by a fire in 1933, the original work of David and Abigail was substituted by a copy by the painter Francesco de Vincentis from Chieti. In a small niche on the altar is the image of the venerated Virgin and Child in clay, a work of the early 15th century. In the niche on the high altar, there is the adored image in terracotta of the Virgin with Child, a piece of work from the mid-15th century, an era with popular worship increased as time went by. Therefore, this allowed that from the little ages with the image of the Virgin, obtained in one of the Merlin built to defend the bridge, that in the Middle Ages linked the valley of the Pietrosa with the town centre to the fair area. We arrived in 1443 to the building of the first chapel that took over the Middle Ages bridge in all its length. Engineer Filippo Sargiacomo in 1870 realized the marble pavement while the stained glass windows were placed in 1912. The 14th, 15th and 16th of September there are festivities to remember the crowning of the statue in 1833, with 2 golden crowns donated from the Vatican Capitolo. Second itinerary, the quarters of Lancianovecchia. Starting from Piazza Plebiscito with the Basilica at your back, walk along Via dei Frentani, situated after the door to the town hall on the left, or after a few meters you will find the first stop of our itinerary, the Fenaroli Theatre. The communal theatre, named after the Lancianese musician Fedele Fenaroli, who lived in the 18th century, was projected in 1834 by the engineer Taddeo Salvini from Orsonia and by the architect Carlo Ponza from Naples, and it was built at the beginning of the Frentani street on the site of the church of St. Joseph Calazzino that was linked to the religious college of the Scolopi Fathers. In honor of the Borbone dynasty, it was named after the dead Queen Maria Cristina di Borbone, and lately called San Francesco, after the Crown Prince son of King Ferdinand II. Luigi Galuzzi, from the San Carlo Theatre in Naples, was in charge of the internal decorations. The official inauguration took place in 1847, when King Ferdinand II of Borbone, the Queen and their retainers visited Lanciano. The theatre had once been opened since 1841 with the representation of the works of Bellini and Donizetti. After 1861, the theatre was named after the musician from Lanciano, Fedele Fenaroli, one of the most important scholars of the Neapolitan school of the end of the 18th century, and later was a teacher at the St. Peter and Maiella Music Academy in Naples. In 1869, the engineer Filippo Sargiacomo widened and reinforced the posterior part, while in 1884 they improved the front. The columns were reinforced with stone slabs from the Vesuvius, and the three entrances were closed with iron doors because they had been lowered to road level. The interior was renovated in 1897 and again in 1938, when it was elevated and adapted as a picture house. In the 90s, the theatre was completely restored with an intervention that restored the dome and the last order of booths. Continuing climbing Via dei Frentani, after a few meters on the left, there is the Captain's Building. The Captain's Building. Originally, the main facade of this building that belonged to the Boccace and then to the Muri and later to the De Giorgio family was in a neoclassical style that looks onto Via degli Agorai on the opposite side to the one we see today. With the demolition of St. Martin's Church in 1848 and the creation of the square of Lago Tapia, the modest front looked out onto the new square. A first intervention of arrangement is evident, above all in the portal, surrounded by two pilasters on which you can still read the initials of the Muri family, and on the window and balcony ledges on the first two floors. The facade we admire today is dated back to 1923, when Captain Alfonso Cotolessa, to whom the building owes its name, husband of a De Giorgio widow, projected and added a story to the building and modernized the front in different styles with floral elements. In the internal rooms, the decorations are very interesting and are dated from 17th to 20th century. The mirror-loving room that still has the original furniture and drapes in the Rochelle style, and the room of Lavancic, whose walls are decorated with papier-peints that depict Greek myths, and whose vault was painted by the painter Vincenzo Gagliardi from Lanciano at the beginning of the 20th century, are worth visiting. Continuing on this street, after a few meters on the left, there is the beautiful church of St. Augustine's. St. Augustine's Church in the quarter of Lancianovecchia belonged to the complex of the Augustine's monastery built at the end of the 18th century. The facade of the church shows evident connections with the front of Santa Maria Maggiore's church that shows the hand of the sculptor Francesco Petrini. The harmonious portal is framed by little spiral columns, floral embellishments, and diamond points of refined execution. In the lunette, whose restoration carried out at the beginning of the 90s highlighted traces of the original colors, we can find a Madonna with child figure. Zoomorphic figures are among the decorative elements carry symbolic values that are very difficult to interpret today. The lion that subjects the goat represents the triumph of good over evil. The crucified lamb is an image of Christ that offers himself like the lamb. Beneath the precious archivolt supported by suspended columns, there is a rose window that, having lost its radical remains, the last decorative crown of Acanthus leaves. On the capstone there are still clear traces of the places where the round elements in maiolica were. In the inside, where the restoration has discovered the original structure of the late 11th century, we can see a set of plasters carried out during the 1730s by the sculptors Gerolamo Rizza and Caro Piazzoli. On the right side of the wave there is the chapel of St. Simon and Jude Taddeo, whose relics were stolen in 1439 by a priest from Lanciano from the same Venetian church. After the theft, there was a military expedition against the city of Lanciano to take back the relics, but the Venetians, instead of disembarking in the harbour of San Vito, they destroyed, according to the legend, San Vito dei Normanni, because of a navigation mistake. Considering the reputation of the sailors, of the inhabitants of the lagoon, the event was considered prodigious and an expression of the will of the relics to remain where they were. On the bottom wall there is an altar screen of the late 16th century, and in the central part there is the depiction of Sant'Agostino between San Michele Arcangelo and Santa Polonia. The church is home to the oldest brotherhood in town, the Confraternita dei Santi Simone e Giudeo Taddeo. Following the same street, after a few meters on the left, there is the church of Santa Croce, where the second miracle of Lanciano is kept, whose story sees a woman named Ricciarella as protagonist. The small chapel with the beautiful front in stone with classical lines linked to the huge building that belonged to the Baroni Fiori-Giuliani family was built in 1583 according to the recordings of the second Eucharistic miracle in Lanciano. The tradition says that by the half of the 13th century in this house lived a girl named Ricciarella, married to the wheeler Jacopo Stazio, who took advice from an older woman, did not hesitate to place a consecrated host on a hot tile to retake her husband's love. At the moment of the desecration, the very small fragment that changed into flesh started to bleed, and Ricciarella, horrified, wrapped the fragment in a cloth and buried it under the bedding straw in the stable. The story continues, saying that when Jacopo in the evening tried to get the donkey back into the stable, the donkey, after many attempts, went in on its knees. 7 years after these facts, in 1280, Ricciarella, upset, confessed her sin to a friar in the adjacent monastery of Sant'Agostino, who dug in the place shown by the woman and recovered the cloth, and inside there still was the bleeding fragment. The friar took the relics to his hometown of Fida in Marche, and from that moment the adoration of the three most sacred relics started. The painting on the high altar shows Sant'Agostino in the middle, that is holding the cruciform reliquary of the Eucharistic miracle, while at the sides there are two figures of saints, with the relics of the roof tile and the cloth. In 2003, two fragments, one from the roof tile, where the host was placed, and one from the cloth that wrapped it, were donated by the Emeritus Archbishop from Ascoli Piceno to the parish of St. Augustine and are kept in the artistic reliquary on the altar of the small oratory. A few meters further up the street there is a beautiful example of a medieval house of the 15th century with the workshop. Medieval workshops. It's in Piazza dei Frentani where St. Maurizio's church used to be before being destroyed in the 19th century that it is possible to find one of the most interesting civil buildings in the city. Nicolai's workshops were named after the merchant Nicolaus Rubius, who had them built in 1432 using architectural elements typical of the Burgundian Gothic style. The date is quoted on the inscription walled up between the two central arches, which were used as shop windows, with their stone benches, while the architrave portal was probably the entrance to the above apartment and the last arcade allowed to get into the real workshop. The linear architrave double lasset windows upstairs are instead the result of a restoration carried out during the 1930s that removed the nice big Renaissance stone windows. After a wedding, the house passed from the De Rubius to the De Archangelis family. Giovanni Tommaso de Archangelis was considered one of the richest gentlemen in Abruzzo during the 17th century. He was a clergyman with duties as apostolic pronothary, vicar, and administrator for St. Giovanni in Veneris Abbey. He died from the plague in 1656, when he was already old, leaving a huge fortune. On the right of Piazza dei Frentani, you can see the old church of San Biagio. San Biagio. St. Biagio's church is the most ancient church in Lanciano, since it was already quoted in 1059 document. On the evening of the 3rd of February, the church is open to believers and the traditional throat blessing takes place. Legend has it that when he was on the way to the execution, the Saint Bishop saved a child who was choking on a fishbone only by putting his hand on his throat. The interior, restored in the mid-20th century, is made of a simple covered truss nave, but it still keeps an element from the old decorative apparatus, a very rare stucco lunette from the Renaissance period, portraying the Annunciation. The church has got a crypt, probably being the original church. The bell tower was built between 1345 and 1400s. It's a strong masonry tower with a pointed double lancet window in the second order raising over the church, and an elegant window, also a double lancet, in the lower part. At its basis there was originally St. Giorgio's little chapel. The church was a parish until 1820 and was kept open as a place of worship until 1860, when it was reduced to profane uses, in particular as rehearsal studio for the Banda di Lanciano. It has been reopened to cult in the post-war period, when it became the headquarters of the Brotherhood di Maria Santissima dei Raccomandati, which moved there from the destroyed San Giovanni's Church. Inside the church, it's possible to admire 3 wooden statues, the oldest one being San Biagio's, dating back to the 14th century. Then there are the 18th century San Isidoro Agricolo statue, made in the workshop of the Lancianese sculptor Domenico Renzetti, and the Madonna della Candelora, masterpiece due to the Neapolitan Barocco sculptor Giacomo Colombo. Going down the slope after a few meters, there is the door of San Biagio. St. Biagio's door. St. Biagio's door is the only survivor of the 9 doors opening into the defence walls to enter the city. The door, taking its name from the closed church entitled to the harmonious saint, protector of the powerful Teaser's Brotherhood, is made of a simple pointed arch that dates it to the 13th century. The arch is made of sown sand, a largely used material in Lanciano, being at easy disposal. The progressive lowering of the road surface has hugely modified its proportion, leaving the foundation elements exposed. From San Biagio's door, it was possible to enter the core of Lancianovecchia, simply pointing the bell tower of the harmonious church, or to reach the Plebiscito Square, going through Via dei Bastioni. Via dei Bastioni. The street called Via dei Bastioni goes along the east side of the Lancianovecchio neighborhood and creates a suggestive itinerary to discover Lanciano's ancient fortifications. Lanciano's bastions exploited the extreme slope of the ground to make the city safe without using actual walls. According to the tradition, around the year 1000, the Norman Ugone di Malmozzetto was asked by the king to force Lanciano city to reinforce the fortilium Ballistrarum in Porta Contromare, identified as the area around San Biagio's door, and unify the different areas of the city using walls. Going along Via dei Bastioni, it's possible to notice some structures which reinforced from the external the safety of the defence system in the access points close to the non-more existing Porta di Pozzo Bagnaro, which was built on the area where a street goes up from the lower valley. These structures, probably dating back to the Aragonese period, are probably contemporary to those visible on the other fortified side of the city, the one that goes from San Nicola's church to Torri Montanari, to defend the neighborhoods of SACCA and CIVITANOVA. Along the itinerary on the left, it is possible to admire the basilica dedicated to the Madonna, and it is entirely built on a bridge. Third itinerary, the quarters of Civitanova and SACCA. The quarters of Civitanova and SACCA are set on a hill opposite the basilica. You can reach them crossing the numerous little streets called Vici. We advise you to go up Via Corsea, the road that starts on the left behind the monument dedicated to all the deceased in the Second World War, and from there we suggest you take the stairs on your right, called Salita dei Gradoni. Once you are at the top of the stairs, turn left, and after a few meters there will be in front of you the majestic church of Santa Maria Maggiore. It is one of the most well-known and important churches in Abruzzo. It was reconstructed in 1277 in a Cistercian Gothic style on a previous 11th century structure, whose original Romanic portal has been recovered during the restoration at the end of the 60s and inserted in the external narthex on the side of Via Garibaldi. The plant had 2 tower bells in origin. The only survivor is decorated with 3 light windows. The church has 3 internal naves, plant ending in a Presbyterian nave with an octagonal dome. In 1317, Francesco Petrini, exploiting the inequality between the lower street and the church plan and leaning against the 2 buttresses supporting the dome, created on the eastern side the monumental portal rising over a wonderful flight of steps, whose deep embrasure is decorated with little columns and other sculptures. In the lunette of the 14th century portal, there is the group of the crucifixion and the inscription with the date and the signature of the artist. The rose window, with some little columns on its sides, opens up over the portal, enriched by 2 slim lateral double lancet windows. Until some years ago, the portal had been keeping the original wooden leaves, which have been substituted by new ones, because of their bad state of conservation. These new leaves have taken up the old design, while the original ones have been placed inside the building. The left side of the front is the most evident testimony of the transformation the building has gone through during the 16th century, when it was enlarged using material from the original building, also including the Gothic portal from the 13th century part that, together with the side portal, now opening on Via Federico Spoltore, connects the building of Santa Maria Maggiore to the Emperor Federico's second sites, and in particular to the constructive typologies typical of Castel di Monte. The 2 windows and the second rose window, with evident elements of classical inspiration, can be clearly referred to the Renaissance. At the end of the 60s, the interior of the church was restored to recover the whole Gothic church, reconstructing ex novo the left aisle of the medieval church, destroyed during the 16th century enlargement in order to create a new and great nave, being the central assix of a complex 3-nave structure with 2 rows of side chapels belonging to the most prestigious families in town. But the drastic restoration ended in damaging seriously the conservation of all the 16th century enlargement, whose important artistic elements have recently been directed to a consolidation and recovery project. Santa Maria Maggiore is very rich in masterpieces, but many of them are not open to the public. In the Presbyterian area, apart from the baptismal font and the altar piece portraying the Assunta by Giovanangelo Ronzi, there are also the precious triptych of the Madonna con Bambino tra San Nicola di Bari e San Tommaso, attributed to Girolamo Galizzi from Santa Croce, and the extraordinary processional silver cross by Nicola da Guardiagrele, a goldsmith masterpiece dated 1422. In the superior part of the 16th century area, there's the oratory of the Confraternita di Maria Santissima della Pietà e Concezione, dating back to the end of the 18th century. Visitors are not allowed inside. Continuing on the left, along Via Garibaldi, you arrive in Largo dell'Appello, where there are the Diocesan Museum and the Torri Montanari. The Diocesano Museum. The place in front of St. Giovina's Church is said the Appeal Place, because during the Napoleonic period the building, already used as a seminary, was intended to host Abruzzo's Court of Appeal. Besides the Curia offices, the library and the diocesan archives, since 2002 it has hosted the Diocesan Museum, which, for sure, one of the most important and richest holy art museums in the region. The exposition is developed in 9 rooms and over more than 1,000 square meters, and gives the possibility to admire testimonies from centuries of Frentani church history, paintings, sculptures, goldsmith pieces, sacred paraments, ex voto, wooden furniture, pieces of embroidery, manuscripts, precious bindings datable between the 13th and the 20th century. The goldsmith area is really worth visiting, with masterpieces like Nicola da Guardiagrele's cross, the almost contemporary Sulmona School pastoral staff, and the pontifical jug dated 1630 and probably made in Naples. Not less important is the fabric area, with the 19th century wonderful sacred paraments belonging to the Archbishop Francesco Maria de Luca, and the astonishing wall hanging dated mid-18th century and measuring almost 50 square meters, painted and embroidered, given as a present to the cathedral by the same archbishop. Among the many paintings there are some particularly worth noticing. The Cristo Porta Croce, made in the first 16th century, the Madonna col Bambino by Jacopo del Lanciano, who must have lived in Venice in the 15th century, and Giacinto Diana's sketch made for the lost fresco decoration on the cathedral dome and dated end of the 18th century. In coincidence with the 2009 earthquake, the piece of Madonna col Bambino tra San Giovanni e San Nicola, a masterpiece by the 1500 Lancianese painter Polidoro da Lanciano, has come back into the museum rooms. Among the sculptures there are in particular a Madonna col Bambino from the Abruzzese school of the end of the 13th, beginning of the 14th century, and another Madonna by an Abruzzese painter from the first half of the 15th century. The Torri Montanari. The fortifications to defend the western side of Lanciano, the only part of the city that couldn't be defended by the huge bastions surrounding the rest of the area, developed gradually, starting from the 12th century until the first years of the extension of CIVITANOVA neighbourhood, before known as La Valle Buona Quarter. The two sides of the walls present different constructive characteristics. In the most ancient part, over the valley, the structure is made of bricks and stones. In the part continuing till Malvo's Inlet and Santa Chiara's door, and connecting to the Aragonese Tower, the wall still appears today in brickworks, and this allows to date it together with the lower tower, with clear 15th century characteristics, to the restoration of the defensive system made in the Aragonese period about 1480. The higher tower, instead, having its side open to the interior in order to avoid its use against the city in case of conquest, is what remains of the most ancient defensive system that made possible the control of the Piana dei Cappuccini and all the Feltrino Valley. People's fantasy has it that on the site of the tower there used to be, in the high medieval period, Jean de Lançon's castle, the legendary Carlo Magnon's paladin, whose adventures are told in a chanson de geste kept in the National Library in Paris and dated 13th century. Near the tower there was one of the 9 doors called Santa Maria la Nova, after the name of the church nearby, today known as Santa Giovina. Notwithstanding the presence of these huge fortifications, This was the weaker part in the Lancianese defensive system. In fact, in 1423, Munzio Attendolo Sforza, commander of mercenary troops, defeated Braccio da Montone and took possession of Lanciano, opening its way through the wall near Santa Chiara. Today, they do no longer serve their defensive function. The Torri Montanare are one of the most beautiful views of the town, and the area inside is used to host open-air concerts of the Frentani musical summer. Looking down from the stands, there is a picturesque landscape of the Sant'Egidio Contrada, where there is the harmonious church and the Civitanova fountain. Going back down via Garibaldi, you arrive in the SACCA quarter, at the end of which there are the churches of Santa Nicola and Santa Rocco. The Church of Saint Nicola. The church dedicated to Saint Nicola from Bari, parish in the SACCA quarter, was built in 1242 on the site of the Saint Pellegrino church, destroyed by a fire. The entrance on Via Garibaldi is formed by a Gothic portal surrounded by a sculpture showing Saint Nicola between the coat of arms of Lanciano and the one of the Ricci family. The bell tower of the 13th century has conserved on the outside an elegant mullioned window with 2 lights and traces of polychrome ceramic basins placed between the arches of the cornice, and it is certainly the most interesting part of the building, which is rather plain. The interior, which is of neoclassical inspiration, was completely rebuilt between 1854 and 1881 by the engineer Filippo Sargiacomo, who carried out the raising on the central nave and projected the decorative plaster apparatus. The presence of a baptismal font, whose surface is full of paintings and carvings, and of an ancient stone stoop, is noteworthy. In 1993, inside a chapel at the base of the tower bell, a precise cycle of frescoes were with different images referring to the legend of Vera Croce, and some figures of saints carried out between the second half of the 13th century and the first half of the following century were discovered. Among the precious furnishings of the church, there is a reliquary from 1456, a piece of work of Nicolaus de Franca, in silver, finely chiselled with golden lamina, and a painting of Saint Michele Arcangelo, painted by Federico Spoltore in 1944. Once this building held the only painting attributed to the painter Polidoro from Lanciano that today is kept in the museum of the Cinquecentesco Castle in L'Aquila. St. Rocco's Church. The small but very old chapel dedicated to St. Rocco is adjacent to the parish church of St. Nicola. The external part of the building, started in 1863 by the engineer Filippo Sargiacomo, shows a clear classical implant and the use of bricks. The interior shows elements that allow us to date it back to the 13th century, but the first written evidence of this chapel dedicated to the pilgrim saint, together with Saint Sebastian, against the plague, is dated to 1560, while the formation of the Brotherhood of Maria Santissima della Pietà and San Rocco is documented since 1579. The high altar we see today was made in 1730. The festival in honour of St. Rocco takes part on the 16th of August, and on that occasion inside the church, wax moulds of anatomic parts ex voto of faithful followers that received a healing grace are placed on tables. During the festivity, blessed bread is distributed and consumed.